Hello, everybody. We'll get started in just a moment.
Hello, good afternoon, good morning, good evening. Thank you for joining us and taking a break for an hour from watching the World Cup. There is a big game later tonight, of course, but we have a thriller for you here now as well about the serious sport of IoT tracking in the supply chain. If you're joining us for the session on connectivity challenges and solutions for the supply chain, then you're in the right place. And if you're joining us for the session on how IoT grew up and got real in the hardest sector of them all, then you're also in the right place. And if you're here because we advertise this is about IoT on steroids, then you're in the right place as well. So yes, this session has had a couple of working titles, but the content is the same. We're here today to talk about IoT in the supply chain and logistics industry, and to capture some of why this industry is more complicated and varied than most others, and why its digital change is fraught with cultural and technical challenges. At the same time, we'll talk about straight IoT as a hardware and connectivity solution, and as part of a wider kind of digital change, architecture and strategy, and why real progress is being made finally. So I trust that makes sense. My name is James Blackman. I edit Enterprise IoT Insights. I'll be chairing today's session, which is brought to you by Enterprise IoT Insights and RCR Wireless in association with Telit, the IoT enablement company, which is variously providing IoT hardware, connectivity, and management solutions. Some housekeeping before we begin. This session is being recorded, and the recording will be available on demand later today. The slides in the presentations are available to registrants after the event. We will have time in the second half of the session to take questions. I'd encourage you to submit those at any time as we go using the Q&A dialog box in the platform. We will come to them as we can. And note as well, the panel will switch their cameras on and go to video for the Q&A session. We will just run with audio mostly. Perhaps some of us will put video on and slides until that point. Okay, so the first thing to do is to introduce our panel. We are 4 strong today, 5 altogether, which is great for kind of a range of perspective. But a pinch perhaps to stick to the broadcast schedule, but we will do our best to see you home on the hour. So I would like to introduce, in order of appearance today, Tancred Taylor, industry analyst with ABI Research. Tancred focuses on asset tracking and visibility, covering devices, platforms, networks, services, and the kind of business transformation these will enable. Eric Hugo, who is Managing Director of Business Innovation at track and trace company Delta Track. Eric has developed and deployed products in 160 odd countries. He manages Delta Track's collaborations with Ericsson and DP World and others. He's worked previously as head of business development for Nokia, among others. I'd also like to introduce Nick Van Hoey Smith. Nick was involved in the development of the original Sigfox network, has developed IoT solutions for various LPWAN technologies. He co-founded SensorTag, which was acquired by Unibiz last year, just before Unibiz acquired Sigfox itself. And at Unibiz, he is in charge of supply chain and logistics. Finally, I'd like to introduce Adam Cousin from Telit. Adam is responsible for driving demand creation and consultancy on key IoT products across all verticals. He has worked previously at TDC and Avnet. So welcome to everyone. Thanks for joining us, and we will hear from you shortly. A quick look at the agenda today, just so everyone is aware of where we are and where we're headed. Each of our panelists will present for 5 minutes on the subject of IoT tracking in the supply chain. They'll say something about their companies and their views on all of this. We'll then go to a Q&A session in the second half. We're down for an hour, so we should have plenty of time for questions. Like I say, please ask them as we go. Something quickly about enterprise IoT insights as well. This is boilerplate stuff, but to give you some background, the publication was launched in 2016 by RCR Wireless. It's covered the enterprise IoT space, really as it crosses into industrial IoT, Industry 4, smart cities, and all the rest of it. The target audience is, well, everyone in tech and telecoms and every enterprise buying from tech and telecoms. You can find us online variously, as you will know. Just to say as well that we write lots of reports, which look good and take ages, and you should seek them out. This slide attempts to show how these kind of look at horizontal technologies and vertical industries and how these kind of cross over, loosely grouped to reflect that. So you'll see the Making Industry Smarter series marked in green, pictures on the left there, which this exercise falls into, which goes vertical by vertical, logistics, mining, utilities, cities, etc., to look at the broader change picture in industry. And then we have digital industry solutions in orange, which looks more squarely at the tech in play, at 5G, AI, IoT, AR, all the rest of it. And the digital factory solutions series in blue, which is dedicated to all the horizontal tech, lots of private 5G stuff in the manufacturing vertical specifically. And here is a library of them all from over the past couple of years. There are a few missing as well, but this gives a sense of what we're doing. Anyway, the point is to flag also there is a new report coming out on IoT and the supply chain to go with this webinar. Right, back to the agenda and the subject at hand. We start with Tancred from ABI Research, who can run a SWOT analysis of sorts for us on the state of the market and show how ABI tracks and makes sense of the IoT tracking market. Tancred, thanks for joining us. Over to you.
Great, thanks, James, for the introduction. Welcome, everybody. Good to see you all here. So, as James said, I'm Tancred Taylor. I'm an industry analyst at ABI Research. I work specifically within what we call our IoT markets team, and in that I look at use cases for IoT type of IoT technologies. We look from the connectivity side, the edge devices, the connectivity, the technologies that go into making the edge devices, as well as the software that gets layered on top of that to actually generate some kind of value from the use case. And over the last year, we've been doing a lot of work in the supply chain visibility market. It's, as James was saying, a very hot market for all new types of connectivity, all new types of software. So my presentation is going to be pretty short. It's just one slide, really. I'd like to just take you through that. So James, if you could move on to the next one. And my goal here is really just to put into context how ABI looks at this market for supply chain visibility more broadly, and to put IoT in context within the broader topic of supply chain visibility, I think. And I think it's important to note there is kind of a distinct, we kind of differentiate between these two sides quite significantly. So starting on that left side, the IoT, supply chain IoT itself. I think it's important to note that IoT is just one of those tools that is used to generate data where previously you couldn't really have data. It's not really anything much more than that. While it is also a tool among many, it is also a collection of tools. And what I mean by that is not this kind of monolithic concept of one technology as you know, people might have historically thought about IoT. There's in fact quite a lot of variety within the supply chain tracking market. You've got variety, for example, on the type of assets to be tracked, whether you're tracking cargo or packages, or returnable transport assets like pallets, containers, crates or racks or vehicles, or any different type of asset. You've got a whole lot of variety there, and each one of those is going to require a different type of IoT solution. You've also got variety from a supply chain type. So we're talking about open loop versus closed loop supply chains, talking about regional versus interregional supply chains. All of these things also require different levels of technology integration. And what that means from that technology perspective, when you have that kind of technology or that kind of that kind of use case requirement variety, what that means is you have a lot more diversity as well on the technology side. And that's really going to feed into what we're talking about in this presentation today. So you have a lot of variety on the form factor of the different devices, from connected loggers to real-time trackers, connected locks that you can put on a container, trackers that can be disposable, smart labels, all those kind of new types of devices emerging and that continue to emerge. And then you also have that diversity from a connectivity perspective. We're going to talk a fair bit about cellular, Sigfox, and LoRaWAN today, I'm sure. But we're also talking about things like short-range wireless technologies like Bluetooth, mesh networks like Wirepass, and non-terrestrial networks, which are kind of starting to see a bit more uptake, getting into the mainstream a little bit more. And the point in introducing all of that, or showing that variety in the different types of technology, is really to show that IoT in and of itself is a very broad web of technologies within the supply chain, so that a company can pick and mix from each one of those to solve for specific visibility gaps. It's not just one kind of monolithic block of tools. At the same time, though, and moving over to the right, IoT kind of fits into this much broader picture of supply chain visibility, which is an outcome which is driven by these software and these services, and which is where value is actually derived. So IoT itself can derive quite a lot of value. You can get more insights on, say, whether your cold chain pharmaceuticals are going out of the required temperature range or something like that. You can intervene in these shipments and save those shipments, etc. But the greatest value from supply chain visibility comes from linking all types of systems together and from generating insights at a much higher level, which enable you to not just see what's happening in the supply chain, but also to understand and to act. So understanding is kind of that present day understanding of what's happening, as well as kind of getting that historical picture of what has been happening and how you can change that historical picture when you're moving into the future. And so there's a whole lot of, and so the conversation really that we're trying to drive at ABI around this supply chain market is on those two fronts, on that connectivity front, and it's on that software front. And it's very much around those two concepts there at the bottom of flexibility and convergence. You need that flexibility, a whole range of tools to basically be able to address the wide variety of use cases, the wide variety of desired outcomes that a company might want. And at the same time, we're talking about convergence, and that's the question of lots of different types of systems coming together. We're not talking about IoT just in a single silo, as a single sort of be-all and end-all solution to visibility. We're talking about IoT as one of the potential tools to fill those gaps, or to help companies achieve the next layer of value, achieve the outcomes that they want to move their supply chain forward, and to generate new value both for themselves, for every different department within the enterprise, as well as for their customers. So I'm going to leave it at that. I'm sure we'll return to some of these topics during the Q&A later, but I'll let the others talk about their own companies first.
Tancred, thank you. That's great. A really good overview there, and a nice way to kind of put IoT perhaps in its place, in its rightful place. We are going to hand over to Eric now from Delta Track, which is, put me right, Eric, but been around for 30 odd years. Delta Track has, and I believe is one of the top 5 in the cold chain game. So, Eric, I'm going to hand over to you.
Hi, everybody. Nice for having. Sorry for interrupting you, James. Nice for having me and inviting me onto this panel. If you can go to the next slide, then I can just dive in immediately. So Delta Track is a 32-year-old startup, and we've never changed our DNA to not be startup, with the big caveat that we've always been profitable. Unlike a lot of new startups entering the market that raise a lot of capital, we've never actually raised capital. We were from day one. And the reason why is that our founder, a gentleman called Fred Wu, who is a Japanese American, he patented something called shadow logging, and which was something in those days, long before before wireless, would record data regardless if a customer switches on the device or not. And that way we could actually guarantee the data that was being collected on our devices. And that initial model that he brought out, we still sell millions of them. We are based in California, right on the border of Silicon Valley. We are sitting, so we've got a very big input from the Silicon Valley, let's say, hype engine, but we're still a bit outside of it because we're on the border. We do everything inside our company. We are very rarely dependent on somebody else when it comes to our products. We've got our manufacturing in the USA, R&D and in China, R&D both in USA and Hong Kong. And then we certified everywhere. So we often get called into meetings where clients are disputing the quality control or the quality of the goods inside a container. And then we have to give expert witness in cases and things like that. And then if you go to the next slide, James. So we are global. We are growing everywhere where we are. I don't know why that one pin is in the middle of the ocean. Oh no, that's just the highlight. We are growing everywhere where we are. We actively went into the IoT market about 8 years ago when DeltaTrack started a collaboration with various RTL players, real-time logistics players globally, and brought their products in. But then we started developing our own products. Our biggest markets are, of course, in the Western Hemisphere, North America, South America. Southern Africa is growing like very fast at the moment. We're well established, 25 years in Europe. And then, of course, having a major player like Fonterra in Little New Zealand has made New Zealand a big player for us because Fonterra is the biggest dairy company in the world. And they export to the whole of Southeast Asia. And as you know, Southeast Asia is the biggest region. And because our founder is from that region, we've got a very strong foothold there. And if we go to the next slide. So some of the happenings that we've had is that we actually managed to cover. We started in, let's say, just logging, and then we basically moved over to the verticals from the logging side, and then we just converted those loggers to the different verticals into RTLs over the last 5 years. So most of our growth is happening in real-time connectivity. The other industries are still very, very strong, and let's say the traditional loggers that aren't connected, still very strong, not going to go away. Not everything is all of a sudden going to become RTL and IoT enabled. It's still going to be manual logging as well. And we can talk in the Q&A why that is. But then we are in the food, life sciences, food safety, aerospace, industrial. Like, for instance, we manage the composite materials for SpaceX and those type of companies. In transit and distribution, produce and floral. I mean, in the USA, the produce and the floral markets are usually held at the same fairs. You know, they don't even separate between them. And then, of course, meat, poultry, dairy, and seafood. If we go to the next slide. So we have solutions for everything. And what is very interesting about our solutions is that we've organically grown. We haven't really forced the technology onto the customer saying, we've got a technology, you're a customer, you have to start using it. We've actually got, because we're a startup, we have quite, well, a 32-year-old startup, we have very personal relationships with our customers. So customers ask us, you know, we've got that challenge. And then we go, okay, we've got access to tools that might offer a solution there. And then we've got quite a few custom solutions that we've built in. To give you an example, recently, one of the largest retailers in the USA said to us they had a real problem with actually figuring out what is the dwell time of a truck once it enters a depot and once it actually gets destuffed. And what happened is that we actually said, well, we've got all these data points. How can we put together a data package that answers that question? So we just took the geofence of when the truck actually enters the depot, which comes with the device. And then we've got a light sensor on a device. And we said, okay, from when the truck enters the geofence until the door opens to be de-stuffed, measured by the light sensor, that is dwell time. And it was a very easy solution to a complex question that's always been asked. So the whole value of the data was shown in its true power there. Now, the main thing, and I'm not going to actually show the last two slides, James. I'm just going to finish up on this. If you think of Delta Track, you have to think of the oil industry, and in the oil industry, we're the roughnecks of the logistics industry. We're the guys that mine data. We put devices there. We're getting our hands dirty. We make sure that the second layer, the middle layer, and the application layer works. So we basically make sure that our devices log, track, and throws the data into the cloud so that other vendors can actually build their businesses on that. That's our core business. Because if you look at in the freight forwarding industry in India, for instance, there are over 15,000 freight forwarders in India, just in India. And some of them still want the data in an Excel format. They don't want to use because they've got internet access. They really want the data in the most simplistic format so that their different systems can work. So we make sure that we take the data oil out of the ground, i.e. inside the container, the quality data. We put it into the containers that the customer really needs to understand the data. And then we do collaborate with customers when they've got specific questions, but we're more of the activators of others' business cases, and so that they can really take the data and run with it. And it's a very complex business because every single product that gets shipped from one point to another point has different criteria that needs to be measured. If it's tobacco coming from Malawi going to North Carolina to processing, it's a completely different ball game than it is for oranges coming from South Africa to Europe, or from Peru to the US. So every single product has got its own separate profile that always needs to be addressed. And we have learned that one size doesn't fit all. And because we are very cost conscious, one size does not fit all, and we have to be very, very attentive to the customer's needs and also to their capital power to actually buy our devices. A person that wants a humidity sensor might not want a light sensor, and a person that wants a shock sensor might not want a temperature sensor. So we have to be very sure, because the margins are very fine. So we've got a very wide range of products, and we actually can get a product up on a request very fast into the market if a customer has a very specific request. And with that, I'm going to wrap up, James, unless if there's something else you want me to add.
No, perfect, Eric. Thank you so much. There's lots of interesting stuff in there, and we will pick through some of that shortly in the Q&A session. But we'll move on. We're okay for time, but we're going to keep motoring through. I'd like to introduce Nick from Unibiz, who can give something on the whole kind of Unibiz story, which is one of the more interesting stories I would suggest in the IoT space at the moment. Nick, let me hand over to you.
Thank you very much, James. So good evening and good morning, I suppose, and good night for some people in Asia. Welcome, and great to have you all on board. Yeah, Unibiz is probably most known for our 0G Sigfox network, which we acquired beginning of this year. And I was actually part of SenseTag, which was a small device manufacturer specialized in asset tracking, which was just part of a takeover before we embarked on a relatively large takeover with Sigfox. So at this moment, we are over 240 employees. And we are operating in 7 countries where we have our own Sigfox network. But we have over 1.2 billion people covered through our Sigfox operators over the world. So we have sales in 73 countries, 240 employees. This is not counting the hundreds of people working for the Sigfox operators who have their own separate companies but work under the Zero-G Sigfox brand. We have over 10 million devices connecting every day, and really good to see that this number is growing hugely. One of the major differences with Sigfox in the past and now being part of Unibiz is what we're going to be discussing today is the convergence. Is we are no longer focusing on purely Zero-G, but we have huge customer success in Sigfox, in LoRa, and we are embedding on a narrowband IoT and satellite integrations through both through hardware and through our middleware software. So we are doing no more a tech first push, but on 100% customer driven, customer needs. If we go to the next slide, we can show a few of our success stories. The one on the left, Nichigas, is not supply chain and logistics, but it's actually in there to show our bespoke solutions. So we build hardware to spec. And why this is in here is because we would not have won this customer if we had not embarked on embedding LTE-M also in our middleware platform and providing valuable data to the end customer. So approximately 80% is Sigfox, 20% is on LTE-M. When we see the Convoy and the Loca on this slide, these are both solutions that have been designed 100% to customer spec. So this is our bespoke solutions. Large volumes. The beer keg business is amazing, super cool to see. I mean, it's something that we never would have thought about, let's say, 10 years ago. Relatively affordable assets, $100. I mean, the tracker is adding $20 easily on top of that. But the data value and the turnaround and the return on investment is just ridiculously positive. So these guys are happy. They're working with Sigfox. They're working with narrowband IoT, and they just have proven from starting from scratch, IoT is now part of the supply chain and logistics. And this CEO is just amazing if you see his way of thinking. DHL is actually one of our other ways of working is we work with partners. Our ecosystem is super important. DHL, very large customer. Heliot is our Zero-G operator in the DACH region, Germany. And the device here is one of our most important hardware partners, which is Alpine. So we have very strong partners that help us succeed in working with very large enterprises where maybe our fit is much better in this bespoke solution. They are very, very good in creating 1 million devices dedicated for all cages and just go. If we move to the next slide, we have some more asset tracking. At this moment, we are 2 million and it's growing fast. We'll be discussing probably later on why and where we see a lot of growth, because it's coming from really low cost trackers for doing a dedicated task. Loscam is working closely, actually very close to what Erich just discussed with cold chain. So this is in Australia, where they are tracking lots of goods for supermarkets on specialized crates where temperature control for food is very important. Convoy, of course, is the beer keg, but it goes down all the way to even managing with Michelin, of course, with managing tires and expectations as downtime on trailers and trucks impacts your supply chain hugely, impacts the cost. So we're seeing a very large differentiation on types of customers from assets that are tens of thousands of euros all the way down to assets. And at this moment, we're actually embedding trackers in assets that are under 3 euros. So just to show that the data value is more important than purely the lost value of an asset. So what we see as the most important part is, if we go to the next slide, is when we visit our customers like Albert Heijn, a huge supermarket here in the Netherlands, everything, or Amazon warehouses, I mean, it's laser guided, ultra wideband. They know to the millimeter They know exactly where everything is. Everything is just in time, and it's perfectly in sync. And then if we go to the next slide, is what happens is they leave this factory where they know everything. And what we're trying to do is we're providing real world solutions for real world problems. So as we say, we love problems because we can solve those. We're trying to give visibility in this mess. That's where we are, and we're enjoying it tremendously. And for me, that's it. And I hope to see you all online on LinkedIn. And thank you very much, James.
Nick, fabulous. Thank you so much. Okay, moving along, I'd like to introduce Adam Cousin, who is Senior Technical Specialist at Telit, and can map the whole edge to cloud piece for us, even as that edge moves about in trucks and boats and things like that. And he can explain how cellular IoT in particular is working very well as a tracking solution. Adam, over to you.
Thanks, James. Thank you very much. And thank you everybody for joining today. So ironically, in logistics, we often talk about the last mile, which is the complexities around getting something from a warehouse to your front door, or the front door of a business. What we specialize in at Telit is a highly consultative approach with regards to the first mile of IoT. So the first mile of IoT is actually the most complicated, and this really centers around getting the data from whatever your thing at the edge is. So it could well be a delivery truck, or it could be a person, or it could be anything, even a COVID-19 vaccine, as we won an award for earlier on this year. How that information is passed through a cellular infrastructure, what mechanisms are used with regards to SIM connectivity, with regards to protocols, how that interacts with cloud and software elements. So this could be enterprise enablement. You may be using the likes of AWS or Azure or SAP or Oracle or some other back-end system in order to enable forward business decisions. And how all these pieces can work and fit together in order to truly realize what it is exactly that as a business you're looking at doing. So we started out as a cellular module manufacturer. So our heritage really dates back to the mid-90s. We were a mobile phone manufacturer at the time, and actually what we did is we branched out and ended up making M2M IoT modules using the expertise that we had. And we continue to make these out of our head office in Trieste, where our global R&D center is. And very proudly, we over the years have acquired various organizations in order to bolster our capabilities around this technology. So today, not only cellular IoT modules, but also connectivity solutions. We have our own core network in multiple locations. This is our Telit Next solution. And we can offer what is probably the most globalized IoT connectivity product on the market, which is perfectly tailored for IoT applications. Not born of a generic mobile phone offering, but born wholly of IoT. And on top of that, we offer some rather clever capability around modem management. And this is becoming increasingly important. And really, when it comes to IoT applications and the complexities, the world isn't necessarily getting any easier. In fact, it's getting a lot harder. And whilst the choices around IoT technology are perhaps consolidating a bit now, the choice around whether or not it could be Sigfox or LoRa or IoT, NB-IoT or Cat-M or one of these technologies, perhaps are becoming a little bit easier. The globalization of this technology and the decisions around the world for different operators to maybe restrict access to their networks brings about new challenges for roaming, the limitations in the ability of the technology in order to pass signaling, the inherent capability of narrowband, for instance, in being able to penetrate even the deepest, darkest crevices of a sewer or a manhole or something, are great, but they bring about additional challenge with regards to latency and reduced bandwidth. And it's our job really to try and help customers to craft a solution which meets the requirement of the brief, so what it is they're looking to do as a business, but also meets the requirements of the tech, we can't be expecting customers to interface a particular cellular technology to a particular enterprise system, knowing full well that actually the unit in real life isn't going to be capable of doing this. And we have to come up with clever ways of doing this. And this is why we kind of create a one edge solution, as we branded it. And this is our lightweight M2M interconnect solution, which brings in device management. So you can control a control plane level the way the modem is behaving on the infrastructure, but also allows you to craft an application layer which utilizes UDP protocols and is able to take advantage of the enhanced capability of narrowband and Cat-M in penetration and coverage, whilst at the same time being able to be clever and cute about how the data delivery happens with exception data reporting in order to drive down those data usage and ultimately power consumption. Do you want to flip to the next slide, please? So if we look at a typical solution architecture, ironically, this hasn't really changed in the last 20 years. You've got a cellular module, you've got a GPS receiver, a GNSS receiver, a microprocessor, and of course a battery and a SIM card. And ultimately how these things go together, broadly speaking, hasn't changed in 20 or 30 years. What has changed is the applications that this technology finds itself in. So once upon a time, it was simple vehicle telematics. These days, we're helping clients put devices in the field which have to survive on batteries for perhaps upwards of 10 years. And it's how to help them curate and craft a solution which is able to do that, is able to deliver the data at rest and data in transit scenarios in order to provide the resolution of information at the cloud end, without necessarily having to pass information continuously from the edge, which of course that has a massive impact on battery life and ultimately the total cost of ownership of the solution. So this kind of boils back to the way that we consult customers on how to ultimately develop an application in order to meet the needs of their requirement, but also within the bounds of reality. So if we look at a typical solution here, we've got an LTE-M and narrowband IoT modem. Now, I wouldn't advocate necessarily narrowband IoT as a great solution for in-transit telematics. The technology is limited in respect to cell handover. What it can bring about, though, is the ability to communicate with something when it is in the worst possible scenario. Perhaps it's inside a container, underneath another container, behind another container. The signal level could be absolutely terrible, and traditional cellular simply wouldn't stand a chance. So being able to leverage perhaps a Cat-M solution or 2G fallback to provide the generic tracking, but using narrowband IoT, for instance, as almost a last gasp or a last breath when the unit is stationary but almost uncontactable, could be a good approach. And of course, in order to do that, you need a SIM card which can access those infrastructures. And these days, simply going out, finding a SIM and putting it inside a module is not as easy as it used to be either. A lot of the time, this stuff won't do what you want it to do off the bat. You'll put the SIM in and you'll assume that the modem and the SIM are just going to interact with each other and it will just kind of do what you want it to. And actually, you couldn't be further from the truth these days. There's a lot of configuration required at an application layer in order to make sure that these devices work appropriately together and within the bounds of how the networks are designed to operate. So there's a lot to think about, even just with a module and a SIM card. And of course, forever we talk about the cost of how much the data is and all the rest of it, but there's always a balance between the cost of the data and actually the amount of power that you're going to consume transmitting that data. And we sometimes have to rewind things back a little bit and go, what protocols are you using? Is there a way where we can slim the data payloads down in order to make them more viable for your application? In the end, what's needed and what's wanted sometimes don't match entirely, but we always find a middle ground. And we pride ourselves on being able to come up with innovative solutions in order to deliver those next generation solutions for customers to drive their businesses into the next decades.
Adam, can I just jump in, if that's all right? I mean, I think this is fascinating. I think the way that, a lot of the conversation we've had is around how these kind of solutions are designed and consulted on, and if we can we bring some of that into the Q&A and just kind of pause there for a little minute, because we've got 20 minutes left, and I think it's a good time now to switch to the Q&A. Are you comfortable with that?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so let's do that. So sorry, Adam, we will come to you on some of the solutions, and but just for now, if we can switch to the Q&A, a reminder to everybody that we have 20 minutes. We're open for questions. Please enter them in the Q&A dialog box on your screen. A reminder of the subject: IoT tracking in the supply chain industry. I'm going to stop my screen share, and if I can ask everybody to turn their cameras on. Okay, so hopefully you can see us. Adam, apologies again to interrupt there at the end, but just talk around that. I think that is important. I think that's been part of the discussion really, about how the the consultancy goes, if you like, and how the solution is arrived at. Just give it, Adam, just give us a bit more on that, on the Telit way of doing things there.
Yeah, of course, no problem at all. So oftentimes what a company will come to us and they'll say that we need a CAM solution or a 2G solution, or they have a brief, they need an always on or a battery powered or whatever that might be. It's very easy to fall into the trap of just giving the customer what they've asked for, without actually probing a little bit deeper about what it is they actually need to achieve. And I've always kind of prided myself on asking too many questions, and just trying to dig a little bit deeper, and in the hopes that actually I'm able to uncover something where perhaps I can help the customer a little more than they initially expected me to be able to. And oftentimes what happens is we talk about enterprise enablement, okay, and most companies out there have heard of the likes of AWS and Azure, and more recent times Google Cloud, for all the wrong reasons. But most companies have got some kind of relationship with an enterprise service already, and they've done something in the past around maybe 2G and 3G, and now they're looking at transitioning into LPWA land, and kind of expect that the enterprise services that they've used before, the protocols that they've used before, are just going to carry across, and they can just continue as they were. And the challenge there is that a lot of these enterprise services, the hyperscalers out there, haven't quite caught up just yet with regards to the limitations and demands of LPWA technology. And their onboarding scenarios are still just a bit too heavy lifting. The payloads involved are just a little bit on the heavy side, because the protocol, maybe TCP, maybe using TLS security, which of course is useful. But there are better protocols out there. There are better ways of doing it, which are more lightweight, are more attuned to the battery demands of the application. So we have to, proto is first in Greek. And really we need to take it back to the protocol, start at the beginning and build from there, and understand exactly what they're trying to do, what they're trying to achieve, and how they can possibly do it, without them going out to market and saying, oh, I need this modem and this antenna and this SIM, and put it all together and actually end up with something that possibly won't work at all. And that's ultimately what we do.
And Adam, just very quickly, just to stick with you on the MVNO question, because it's a mad market. The MVNO market is, there's hundreds, or at least 100, surely, IoT MVNOs out there. And you're riding on the back of kind of roaming deals and various other MVNO, BICs, I believe, and some of these types of companies. So why? That's right. Just explain the kind of what you're doing differently there. Why choose Telit for airtime kind of thing?
No, absolutely. So I engage with, as you can imagine, dozens and dozens of customers on a weekly basis. And what tends to happen is that perhaps things don't go as smoothly as expected. Sometimes things are deployed, decisions are made, things are in the field, and the device doesn't behave quite as anticipated. And the challenge there really comes back to, how do we ascertain what the problem is and fix it? The most important thing is fixing it, okay? Now, if connectivity has been sourced through one party, the modem is sourced through another, and the application enablement sourced through another, generally the three companies there don't talk to each other. The support teams don't talk to each other. So what the customer ends up doing in a very insular level is going to company A for support, company B for support, and company C for support, not really knowing where the problem truly lies. We're oftentimes reliant on the customer to issue commands to the modem and find this out and find that out, but we don't really know the connectivity vendor they've gone to, what their capabilities are, what the roaming agreement in place is, and all the rest of it. We end up really dancing around and fighting, in many cases, a losing battle in order to try and determine what exactly is the best course of action. What I've come to realize really in the strength of having connectivity as well as the module is that there's a lot of information that you can glean simply from connectivity, actually without having to pass any information across from the modem. You look at a typical solution architecture and a customer wants to understand roughly where their device is. A lot of people don't know that you can do that just by making a context activation, using the radius server log from the connectivity side with a latitude, longitude to determine the rough location of the modem. You haven't had to pass any data. All you have to do is establish a connectivity, a context activation. So for a rudimentary location, you can do that without actually consuming any data at all. When it comes to support, understanding and being able to look at the intricate details around this is very, very useful. But on top of that, building an IoT connectivity solution with complete control over your own core network, with multi-location, with cloud native redundancy, and with the ability to support things like EUICC for profile delivery, what we're trying to do is curate a solution which meets the demands of or exceeds the demands of IoT without having to be too onerous and without the customer really having to learn too much about all of this. It shouldn't be a learning curve for organizations in how communications work. They've got businesses to run themselves. We can be that expertise.
Yeah. Okay. And just if we zoom out a little bit, I don't want to address this kind of this supply chain challenge, and perhaps Eric, I can bring you in here a little bit, and just because you're close to the producer, you're close to the third-party logistics provider, you're selling into these kind of customers, you have a view of that market, and you have a view of the market across the world, in lots of perishable goods in the cold chain, this kind of stuff where there are issues. Just, how do you see this supply chain market? And I know we've discussed it before, and it was interesting to hear your views. And I just wonder if you could share those, as opposed to like digital change in manufacturing, say, or in mining, these other kind of industry for industries. What is the supply chain, and what are the complexities and challenges of it?
Well, logistics is the second oldest profession in the world. I mean, carrying something from someplace else. And I come from the electronics industry, and previous revolutions were quite easy. Like, for instance, the media being disrupted by the internet and Elon Musk disrupting cars. But those were fairly new industries. They're very new industries. We're talking about an industry that is about 6,000 years old. One of the oldest cuneiform tablets that were discovered in Samaria was a packing list from going from one store to another store. And I don't think, and from the electronics industry, I think that we do a lot of navel gazing, because we basically have blocks and we're trying to get those blocks to fit holes without trying to understand the holes. And what I mean by that is that how many people realize that, for instance, if you ship a container, there have to be 3 copies of the bill of lading that basically tells you about what's in that container and stuff like that. The reason why there's 3 is because one has to go with the container, one has to go by horse, and one has to be posted to the receiver. That is where the industry is right now. Okay. Some of the quality control data that is owned on a vessel that basically ships from Egypt to Europe, if it's whatever goods, the laws that manages those goods was made by Napoleon Bonaparte, and IoT is not going to come into this industry and disrupt it like another industry, because there are big players and it is a super complex industry. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, Eric, and just as well, because I'm just mindful of time. So just to move it along as well with you, Eric, just the way you see it and the way you told it to me about the producer and how this matters to them.
So the way that it works is that a supplier places an order for something. They have a commercial calendar in Europe, and they place an order with the importer saying that we want oranges in August. The importer then goes to an exporter in a third country and says they want oranges. Now, this is usually about 6 months before the oranges even has to get delivered. And then let's say Lidl or Aldi or whoever, they say we want it August the 1st. The importer then goes to the exporter. The exporter, these oranges aren't produced yet. The exporter then goes and finds a farm that might produce these goods, and somebody has to take a risk. Somebody has to take a risk to start producing these oranges. They have to pay for the labor, they have to pay for everything. And all of a sudden, we have an electronics company coming and telling them, because the retailer in Europe says that you have to have a tracker in the container to manage the quality. But you, Mr. Producer, you have to buy that tracker. Not the retailer in Europe, the producer of the goods. They are the responsibility, because the whole industry is risk averse. So they push that risk to the producers on the other side of the planet, the poorest people, and they tell them you have to have a $40 to $60 tracker, because the electronics industry determines that's the price of the product. And the margins, I mean, people in South Africa, the average salary is 30 euros, and that's the average salary. But we are getting this industry to start buying trackers, or we're forcing them, because we've got legislation here in Europe. And it's kind of like a disconnect to me. It's like we're not producing products for the market that needs to buy, that gets ordered to buy these things. James, we had a discussion, for instance, the sunset of the 2G networks and so on. How many African countries or South American countries are going to sunset their 2G networks? They are feeding Europe. They are feeding the USA. But yet, we are kind of like saying, no, but you have to buy a 5G tracker, adding $20 to a device, because that's the way we work in Europe. So there's a big disconnect for me between the global South or the developing nations and the modern world. We are used to exorbitant prices because we understand where it comes from. But a person that's got 1,000 hectares of oranges down there, they don't care about, sorry to say this, guys, but they don't care about 2G, they don't care about 3G, they don't care about Sigfox, they don't care about Telit, they care about a purchaser on the other side of the world saying that I won't buy your goods if you don't have that tracker in it. That's what they care about.
So Eric, can I just, to Tancred, just how do you see this? Because there's clearly, and I think when you say, they don't care about 2G and 3G and LoRaWAN and Sigfox and all this kind of stuff, the message clearly from all of you is that nobody cares about that in the enterprise space. What they care about is a solution that works, right? And a solution that works for them. And the dialogue increasingly, the point about IoT growing up, arguably, is that this consultancy and this understanding of enterprises is perhaps advancing slowly. But Tancred, just you've got the story you've told about how IoT is a kind of a point solution essentially, and there's complexity, there's huge complexity in that, and that needs to be navigated about, what can be afforded and what can't be afforded and what the use case demands, and we've talked about closed loop and open loop kind of supply chains and this kind of stuff. But just explain where we're up to with this kind of this integration across the broader, transport management system and the warehouse management system, and how, industry enterprises particularly are viewing IoT now. Do they see it as a bolt-on, as something that needs to be integrated? Is that understanding there on the enterprise side, and is it understood on the supplier side also?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. So I think one of the things in the IoT market, as I was mentioning earlier, is that there are just so many of these different types of tools, both within the IoT market, and there are also lots of tools outside of the IoT market. And there's a lot of noise that happens in IoT. There's a lot of discussion that happens within the IoT ecosystem. It's people love to talk and say this solution is great for that, and you should adopt this solution for this, and that's all very healthy for the development of the IoT ecosystem specifically. But I think when you think about an enterprise adopting, this outcome of supply chain visibility and how they're going to go about doing that, it doesn't really come down to that at all. It comes down to, what is the outcome that they want to achieve specifically? How is this use case going to be advancing their particular strategy for improving X, Y, Z factors within the supply chain? And to do that, it's not a question of what tool you could use. It's a question of using all of the data that you currently already have existing within your supply chain. And as Eric said, you've got a whole lot of data that already exists there. You've got your 3 bills of lading within the TMS. You've got proof of deliveries. You've got so much data lying within your ERP, TMS, WMS, YMS systems. Then you've got so much data coming from your RFID tools, your barcodes, your GS1, your GS1 enabled barcodes and that kind of stuff. All of this data already exists. And it's a question kind of linking it all together, of aggregating it in this kind of convergence of systems to make sure that people are actually using the data that they already have. And then IoT comes in as a separate thing afterwards, right? You're sort of filling in the gaps that you had in your visibility, and you're addressing new use cases. You're building new use cases where previously you didn't have data, or where you didn't have real-time data, and you have found that your strategy requires you to have that real-time data. But I think there's the evolution of processes. People don't really want to think about that IoT technology specifically. It's, people are thinking much more about how can I just scrape together all the data that already exists across my enterprise, and how can I use that? And it's not good. It's not about finding a point solution. It's about finding the thing that's going to work to achieve the outcome that you want.
Okay, and thank you, Tancred. And Nick, just to bring you in, just because the Unibiz stories, the Sigfox story, has always been a good one. It's always talked a good game kind of thing. And I'm interested, how that's developing, how, just from a technology point of view, the tracking piece around, low cost. I mean, there's been talk about dollar trackers. There's arguments that they are commercial, they're not commercial, this kind of stuff. Just within under Unibiz's kind of stewardship now, is that very much part of the strategy to drive kind of massive scale through very low cost solutions, or is the strategy much more about marrying technologies together in ways that just simply work?
It's boiling down to both, because we've stopped completely, I would say, with our tech push. It's moved 100% to, if a customer has a return on investment calculation, if they have their needs, we end up being able to get a fit yes or no. And we see that for extremely low cost, Sigfox in Europe is, we have $3 trackers, they're out there. We'll get to the $1 tracker within 2 to 3 years. So it's not there yet, period. It'll get there if somebody signs for 1 million units, we have a $1 tracker. But we are live at this moment. We have customers in Japan doing 100,000 boxes. If you tear the box open, you're getting a message. It's $3. NXP working on $5 devices, RFID included. We see, in general, if we half the price, we see a 10 times volume. So is the massive IoT coming? Yeah. And is it going to be a marriage between LP1, Sigfox, and LoRa in private, and with modules from the likes of Telit with narrowband IoT, LTM for sure. We won't get into the States without narrowband IoT or LTM, and we won't get to dollar trackers without Sigfox in Europe. But the customers really don't care.
Jump in there, Nicholas. Sorry, I have to say this. Most goods move from one geographical market to another with completely different technical expectations. So yes, we will have a $2 tracker in Europe, in certain places in Europe, definitely. Yeah. But then they move to a place where the Sigfox network is not, which will mean that me as a developer of these devices, I still have to I have to create for the lowest common denominator. I have to create for the lowest common denominator. So because the logistics industry is not standardized, and it's far away from being standardized, we still got, I would say, decades for this road. Yes, I understand. I've seen Sigfox in action. And when it's a closed environment, it works brilliantly. It works brilliantly. It does everything. But we live in a globally connected world, and I have to make sure that goods from Ghana or from Dakar can come to Europe.
We have a satellite. We're working. As I said, that's why we understand. We're not pushing tech anymore. We have a Sigfox LTM, narrowband IoT satellite, because we understand that we even need your temperature data sent from containers on a ship from Ghana But if we then run into an area with Sigfox, we're happy to go to the lowest, data cost, battery cost solution. So we'll be seeing hopefully more and more chipsets arriving that are, multi-tech, so the customer really doesn't have to care at all, and we can get to, the customer, the budget, their restrictions, and work from that way instead of from the tech up. Yeah.
I love that.
Can I just ask, sorry, and it seems very much that, as we've kind of discussed, it depends on the discipline and what's being tracked and where it's going, and the discussion with the enterprise and what can be afforded. Just there's a lot of talk. We're coming up to the close really, and I'm kind of reluctant to close it, but we are up on the hour, and it's just the nature of things with a split kind of a schedule with presentations and Q&A, and we could really run this whole hour as a Q&A session, and perhaps we'll do that again or next time. But just, can I ask, there's a lot of questions here, and there's a lot of kind of interest from an enterprise IoT audience in private networks and how, you kind of join your supply chain, so you run it from the, potentially from the private network in the kind of mine or wherever it may be across on the to the factory, out into the warehouse and such like, and there is this kind of roaming requirement for a roaming between public and private networks. Adam, I know you've answered in the Q&A, but it is a question which has come up a couple of times. Just give us a view on that and how that can work and how it will work.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we look at private networks, for sure, 5G private networks are a massive thing now in Industry 4.0, especially with things like Release 16 with ultra reliable low latency communications and sub-millisecond latency, which is crucial when you're talking about fast reactions on factory floors of machines and other such things. And of course, there's a precedent there that says, well, actually, maybe I've got a device that's on my factory floor that I want to move out of my factory floor and be in the real world, like maybe a car, for instance. Car on a production line, maybe it can utilize the private 5G infrastructure while it's in the factory being built. And when it goes out of the factory, maybe it can continue to function in the real world on the 5G infrastructure. And likewise with Cat-M and Narrowband and other such 4G technology, there are companies out there that make them to sell products which can work down in mines and things like that, which give you a nice enclosed environment. And of course, the nice thing about those enclosed environments is they're very controlled, and you get guaranteed quality of service. And when they go out in the real world, of course, the game changes slightly. Okay. And whilst it's possible to have a device that will function in both, because look, let's face it, the radio technology is identical. These femtocells and private networks are designed to function in exactly the same manner as a public network. The most crucial thing comes back to the subscriber identity module, the SIM, because in a private network, you have to subscribe to the service in one manner. In the public world, you have to be able to subscribe to the public service. And how that SIM management, the APM management, and that bit actually is a thing that people need to focus on. Because at an application layer, you have to make sure that your device can function not just in the ideal scenario of a private network, but in the slightly maybe sub-ideal level of being in a public, out in the wild. Maybe your quality of service isn't quite as good, and how your application's able to cope with those two different scenarios is vital. But it's fully possible. It's not even that difficult.
Yeah, and just to Eric, just to bring you in again, just before we close, just I wonder, and briefly, if you can, it seems to be this the difference almost between what you said about easy solutions to complex problems. That actually often it just takes the technologies there. You just need to kind of work it out, and it can be done. And then also quite complex problems which do require complex answers. Is that true, that we can overcomplicate things, and that it's all about understanding your customer in the end? I guess it's a bit of a cliche, but is that right?
It's more than right. I mean, the logistics industry has not been involved with all this technical terminology. I mean, the logistics industry is still getting to terms with www and maybe a little bit of TCP/IP and something like that. And all of a sudden, I mean, we have meetings with very high. The electronics providers seems to think that the logistic players who are freight forwarders will by default understand these very complex terms, and they don't. And they don't care, and they're not going to educate. What they say is, what's the margin? Is it demanded from me from a buyer? Can I do this and reasonably still make a living out of the products that I ship? And will my products get to the point B in a good quality way? How many people that owns Apple computers knows which chipsets are in that computer? The M1 or the M2? How many people know that Google Pixel uses the Tensor chipset? They don't. They don't care. Maybe a couple of gamers are very interested in their Ryzen 9 32 gigs. Most people use their computers to write documents and emails. That's what's important for them. And that's what's going to be the criteria for them buying a computer. And the same is for the IoT industry. Most people are not interested in what technology is driving my devices, but can I, like Nicholas or Tancred said about can I get my data that will indemnify me in this cutthroat world of small margins and real high risk. Remember, I told you, 20 to 40% of all food gets wasted, and yet the industry is successful. It's a rich industry, but that means that there are people that are going bankrupt right now because of that. Don't bother them with all these technical terms. Just solve their problems.
Okay, and I'm just going to go around. Tancred, I know that we've talked before, and I just want to give everybody another opportunity. We're going to run over by 10 minutes, and I apologize for that, but I hope you stay with us. But Tancred, just on this idea that, when we've talked before, you said, you gave a couple of examples of kind of logistics organizations which are doing this well, and the approach was very deliberate. You said it was think big, but kind of start small and go piece by piece. Just explain that and why that's important to knit together, everything that's going on in the supply chain for an enterprise.
Yeah, sure. I think think big, start small is probably a good way of thinking about it. It's very much a question, I think, generally of having a plan in the first place. It's a question of not using technology because you have technology. It's a question of, again, what is the outcome going to be if I use X, Y, Z technology? And you've got all of these tools again at your disposal. I think companies that are doing well in this domain are the ones who have this really long-term roadmap, this 10-year roadmap of how our device is going to evolve, how is technology going to evolve, how are technologies like RFID going to give way, if at all, to things like smart labels? How is cellular going to play a role against proprietary technologies? How can I leverage my software? How can I leverage my barcodes that I've already got everywhere in my supply chain to generate sources of data that aren't necessarily real time, but can still answer all of the questions that I currently need? So I think the companies that are doing well in this space are the ones that very much know what they want to achieve, what they are achieving currently, what they want to achieve in the short term, and what they want to get into in the long term. And I think generally a good analogy, I think, for sort of how this supply chain market is evolving is that it's kind of started from this place of probably that's about 5-10 years ago, this place, unconscious incompetence. It's like there's 4 stages of language learning, right? You have this unconscious incompetence that comes first, and people have no idea what the problem is, and that there is a problem. Then you move on to this conscious incompetence, and so some people realize, in the last 5 years, there actually is a really big problem that we need to solve, and how do we go about solving that? By bringing all this data together. And then you have that third stage of this conscious competence, where you realize where suddenly, oh, I'm actually pretty good at doing some things and gaining visibility into a few different parts of my supply chain. I'm sort of starting to string a couple of things together. And then finally, you've got this final stage of this unconscious competence, which is basically saying, how could anyone 5-10 years ago have managed without the tools that I currently have at my disposal? It's kind of impossible to think about that. But again, these things don't happen overnight. IoT doesn't happen overnight. Software doesn't happen overnight. These things take a long time to develop. You've got to develop each module separately to address specific problems and to address your specific outcomes. And then when you do that, that's when you've sort of got this plan in place. That's when you can start implementing it step by step, bringing in different parts of the enterprise and creating different levels of value for each one of those.
Okay. And Nick, I'm going to come to you last. It's going to be the last question, and then we're going to wrap. But Nick, just thoughts on what you've heard, and I guess I'm interested here a little bit, very briefly, on the reception generally from the market about this unified LP-WAN vision that Unibiz is kind of pushing and promoting, so that an enterprise doesn't have to think about IoT, it doesn't have to think about LP-WAN, whatever it may be, it just works. Thoughts before we wrap up?
Yeah, it's you know what it is. It's nice. It's stopping this tech bashing that was going on in the past between LoRa and narrowband IoT and Sigfox. And it happens if you get this, not invented by me. We've seen it's fun. I came from SensorTag. I used to have a Sigfox network, and now I'm in a company where we just know it's not tech driven, and it's so nice to be old school, customer centric. And I know if we converge together, we'll end up getting chipsets, running costs down, so we can help the likes of Eric understand we need to help, Africa, but we need them here. We'll make the best of connecting, the Google Clouds and the AWSs at a data cost which is affordable, which at this moment sometimes just isn't. So it's we're getting there. It's good that we're sort of all on the same page now. We'll do our best to run down the ultra low cost. We'll need the higher data for, things like getting lots of temperature measurements and transporting them over LTM, but getting down to a sub-dollar device, that will be our task in this ecosystem. And we're just working with partners now, and we're just really happy with working with, the likes of Alps and NXP and Telit. It just makes, it's going to make life easier for the next 5 to 10 years instead of the last 5 to 10, which we've been battling a bit too much. And now I think we're sort of focused on providing simplicity to our customers and working from return on investments. So it's good.
Cool. Okay, look, I'm going to stop there. We've got a few questions coming in. All I can say is sorry we didn't get to more. There is a report coming out with lots of this stuff in. It will be available in a week or so. Look out for that. And I suspect, and I hope lots of your questions are answered there too. But for now, from all of us, thanks so much. Thanks to Tancred at API. Thanks to Eric at DeltaTrack, to Adam at Telit, and to Nick at Unibiz. Thanks for your time. Thanks for your patience. And everybody's tuned in. Thank you very much. We'll hope to see you soon. Thank you.